Oh, video game stories. If you actually clicked on this video, I already applaud you for giving that shred of a shit to hear someone else talk about stories in a video game. I mean, it isn't even a question that video game stories are usually the least important aspect of a game. But does it have to be? Why do companies continue to spend millions of dollars writing stories for things around their products? Thinking back to some games I've played, there have definitely been some awesome stories that really made a game worth playing, which, as cringy as it sounds, I think is one of the main reasons why video games aren't a waste of time. Like any good book, a story can give you a new perspective or inspire you to make a real change in your life, and games are really no different. So, why is it that stories in video games are usually so poorly executed and become so easily forgettable? Well, let's take a look. Let's start with actually what makes up a story. For my random deep dive into story writing, I've learned that there are actually three components to any story: plot, character, and environment. How well these things are presented and how they intertwine is basically how good your story is. And as a super quick example of what I mean, let's take a look at a game like Elden Ring, for example, where people say has a good story. I mean, how does a game with a silent protagonist where you basically just walk around and kill things have a good story? Why do people feel so immersed playing this game? Well, when you look at the environment, which includes these vast landscapes or face twisted enemies, it's not just a cool visual. Tons of games have great visuals, but not great stories. The thing you're probably forgetting is that they hired frickin' George R. R. Martin to build their world, and it's always evident that some historic shit went down. There are hour-long videos that go into each landscape, each little microcosm of the game, where these cultures and nations left their mark on this world. It's something you feel as you go along with the gameplay. The truth is, though, not every game story is as immersive as Elden Ring. They usually focus on only one of these things and kind of forget the rest: the environment. I don't think it's a surprise considering it's probably the easiest thing to hype up in a 30-second trailer, but it's also why the first moments of games are always genuinely pretty awesome. There's a reason why games make you feel like you're stepping into a new world. Because you are. And then shortly afterwards, after you kind of get used to the environment, your immersion tanks, because then all you have left is gameplay, which by its very design is going to be a little repetitive, and there's no characters or plot to keep you interested. But to give game developers a bit of a break, you have to consider that you can't just make a good character or plot like you can in a book. Why? Because it's really hard to balance a narrative with gameplay, which is actually the most important part about games. Take character development, for example. It is difficult to have good character development when the main character is being controlled by the audience, who at the end of the day are playing games because they want involvement in that decision making. That's the gameplay. So, how game developers have typically worked around this is by taking some of that autonomy away and giving you a character you might not like, or they're faking your character's growth. And I'll show you what I mean. I've been playing the Hogwarts game, which, like most AAA games, are pretty fun at the start. The environment was amazing, the plot was simple, but the characters. These character arcs were just awful. Starting with the main character, it's like they were confused about whether or not to actually give you a character arc. They start by giving you a big mystery. You have special powers and you're a fifth year, which is pretty interesting considering even Harry Potter himself was in a foster home and still managed to join Hogwarts as a first year. But what did they do with that question? Literally nothing. I kept expecting clues and depth, but then when each next scene was just more magic or Easter eggs from the Hogwarts environment, it started to get a little boring. The game never explains why you were so delayed or why you're special, and believe me, this game tries its very hardest to make you feel special. Another problem with the characters in that game, in general, was the endless praise people gave you for every basic thing you did. From the dungeons to the classrooms, it seemed like every button you pressed gave you an endless stream of praise because I guess they're just trying to make you feel like a hero. But when you do this, especially this much for simple things, it just makes everyone else seem incompetent. This narrative direction of attributing every single success to the player actually ruins it for other character arcs too. Each of the important side characters did actually have some interesting backgrounds and conclusions, but they still just felt completely skippable, and it's entirely because of how they got there. These characters attributed all of their own growth to the main character doing main character things. I mean, this character made a big speech of how great I was because I fought a troll and told me that I inspired them to stand up to bullies, which is okay. But then you remember that this character was actually right next to you in a combat tutorial and was killing the troll too. So when you feel that disconnect as to why a character change happens, the character arc is just completely ruined and people stop caring. But if you nail character development, it can easily become the highlight of your game, even if the rest of the game is just kind of mediocre. Just look at Final Fantasy 15. What is this game actually known for? It's a bro road trip simulator, and the way these characters are individually defined yet display such an awesome degree of friendship and putting them to the test is the best thing about this game. From how you fight, the intermissions, everything is kind of based on these four dudes, and it's such an enjoyable experience. Where that game kind of falls off, though, is in its plot, which we'll get to. But before that, what actually is a plot? Well, it's basically the questions and answers a story will give you. It's seeing how a conflict unfolds, which is inherently actually interesting because conflicts by their very nature pose some interesting questions. Who's going to win? How are they going to win? Why? Plots do come down to different tastes, but in general, a good plot asks believable and interesting questions with believable and interesting answers.
Nothing destroys the interest of a player more than when something so nonsensical or out of character happens. It quite literally pulls the player out of the story, like a big hand waving in front of their faces, reminding them that they're just playing a game. At the same time, people also love it when something unexpected happens, but then it'll actually make sense when you think about it. The trick is to get people invested in your story while they're playing, and it can completely change the way that their game is played. Look at games like Undertale, Portal 2, and Hades. They aren't fundamentally story games, but can you imagine these games without their story? Seriously, try and imagine it. And I know lots of people can say, oh, this game or that game actually has a good story if you read everything. It is equally as important to pace that story well.
Going back to Final Fantasy 15, I just completely gave up on my first playthrough solely because of a bad plot stretch. To be fair to the game, I had played the demo a ton, perhaps, so I was getting a little used to the combat, the environment, and the characters. And then this happens.
They just showed up and then... Poor Jared.
What do you mean? What happened to
There
Jared?
was nothing we could do!
Who is Jared? The old guy I met 5 minutes earlier? It was at this point where I think the story just completely fell apart. I just finished a huge side mission to save my car. Now I'm getting revenge for someone who the story hasn't really given you any reason to care about. Then I'm going to go and repair a boat somewhere, and now I need Mithril to repair that boat. Wasn't there a war going on here? I mean, what are these dudes doing? It's such a shame because after listening to a story summary, it does actually get much better, but with like any sort of communication, how you say something is more important than what you're saying. So now that we've discussed what makes a good story and how some games do them poorly, what can we recommend to game developers for better storytelling? After all, a better story can lead to better games. Well, the first thing I would say is, don't do it if you're not going to do it well. You don't need to make a bigger deal out of the story if you don't have a writer who can expertly tease out the questions and answers for the audience in an entertaining way. With characters as well, characters are better off not changing at all than giving them a dumb life-changing arc that no one can relate to. This is something that Nintendo completely delivers on. Their games are 110% on gameplay and environment, while the characters and plot are simple and likable. Link, go and stop Ganondorf in the middle of the map. Oh, by the way, you never speak and literally everything else is optional. And what's the result? Players are always running around the map, climbing, doing puzzles, and whatever this is. Players are constantly experiencing the best part about their games. Compare this to a game like Borderlands 3, which was riding off the back of a great prequel. Most people agree that the series flopped completely because of character and plot. Yes, the problem was compounded by the fact that a big part of the Borderlands series was known for its humor in their character and plot, but it shows that bad elements of a story do much more harm to a game than not having one at all. I'm absolutely stupefied that a game can almost have 9 hours of cutscenes and dialogue and have less plot happen than 15 minutes of a Lord of the Rings movie. From some of my research, I found evidence to suggest that they actually do this meaningless cutscene crap to act as a break to extend our attention span, which to me sounds like one of those dumb psychology studies that reduce a whole bunch of variables to induce a specific result, while ignoring the fact that your result is completely irrelevant in the real world. It's like they didn't consider that people would simply stop playing if a game gets too long and boring. Or that if these people wanted a break, they could, I don't know, pause the game on their own. As of writing this video, only 25% of people actually finished Hogwarts, and it's not supposed to be a difficult game. So let's cut down on the pointless fluff. The last and best thing I think we can do is actually ask game developers to incorporate storytelling into their gameplay better. Why do players have to compromise on their active game time to tell a story? Just steal the way that From Software does it and use environmental storytelling. Do things like play the lore while the player is running around. Personally, I think the wall of text from NPCs should just be abolished and voice lines should just continue playing. That's it for this video. Give me your thoughts about video game storytelling in the comments. Thanks everyone.